have Yomi Fawemi, who is a human resources development professional. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. First of all, what's your take on our response to COVID-19, especially in the education sector?
Okay, good morning. Thanks for inviting me. We've had, and that's thanks for that question. We've had mixed responses when it comes to our response to COVID-19, particularly in the education sector. We've had quite some attempts by the public sector to provide resources. Some states went to start to put resources on television. Some states started to put resources on radio stations and all manner of stuff. Some states actually went to start to procure gadgets and equipment for students to be able to get materials to read. So some states did that. Some states did that, but did that very slowly or a little bit late. For the private schools, most of them seems to have quickly moved on to start to do things. But what you see is that everybody claims they have gone online. What people have just done is just to put materials on another medium. E-learning is not the same as going online. The way you teach people in class is different from the way you teach when you're doing any form of e-learning. So one of the things that happened to us is that we seem to have defined in Nigeria that once you put any learning materials on a device, that is e-learning or that is online learning. The pedagogy, the structure, the learning method, the learning processes for online learning is different from face-to-face learning. That's one of the things, the gaps we have also had. We have also had very slow response to deal with what are the likely challenges we will have because schools are shut down. One of the things that you realize is that for many children, schools are centers for protection, schools are centers for socialization, schools are centers for protection. I mean, so you've seen studies that show that most of the sexual harassment and all form of harassment against young people happen around the home. And in those cases, schools becomes the avenue. I've not seen any state come up with a strategy to deal with the protection of the Nigerian child who is at home. The third part of it is the challenge of the fact that as we are reopening and we're asking employees to go back to work, we're not talking about what happens to their children. So when everybody was on lockdown, the father, the mother, and the children were on lockdown. So things were fine. So, I mean, education could happen, mentoring could happen, interactions could happen. Now we have opened up and said the parents should go to work. And nobody has told us what to do to those children. So what happens to the child? This child can't go to school. Because of COVID and social distancing, many people have asked their house help to stop working because of transmission. So those house help have stopped coming. Now, when those parents go back to school, those children are going to be at home with who? We've told them that their grandparents are more susceptible to COVID, and so many people have tried to distance their children from their grandchildren. What has happened now is that some people have gone to get those grandparents to stay with those children. Some have gone to get back their house help who go and come every day, commute to traffic. So we've done very little in terms of learning, but we have done practically nothing in terms of protecting the Nigerian child while he's at home. Many of the studies that we have gotten has been around increase in domestic violence between other husband and wife. But we all know that if there is an increase in domestic violence,
if I may comment briefly, yeah, if I may comment briefly, you'll get to that, but just so we don't lose sight of some of the important, issues you mentioned in the early, part of your response. Now, you talked about online e-learning, and I'd like to just quickly get you to clarify something. So you said that it's beyond just putting materials online and ask people to download perhaps a PDF or, Word version. How should these documents be treated such that we can say it is indeed some form of e-learning? Because it's only a few people that are returning to school. Some others will still be engaging in this e-learning, or as you put it, putting materials online for them to download. So how should they be handled for proper learning to take place?
Okay, so actually it's a specific body of knowledge that deals with making materials available at a distance from the learner. It's not just the regular teacher who is teaching 1 + 1 or A + 2, A + A times B or X, Y, or it's not that same skill that you use to translate that material to what a child will be able to access at a distance is a totally different skill set. Now, it's possible that for somebody who train in education learning to also be trained in instructional design. That's what it's called. Instructional design is how you're able to translate that into materials that people can take advantage of. So what has happened is that for many of our schools and many of our educational systems, we don't have people that can connect that teacher who has materials to stand in front of students and teach with what happens when that child is not there. So it's not just about putting materials online. You yourself know, let me give you an instance. You want to teach a child the Pythagoras theorem, or you want to teach a child dance. Right, so dance, for example, you want to teach dance, or you want to teach drama, or you want to teach physical education. You want to teach a child how to run or how to do things. If you're in front of the child, the way you will treat a child to dance is different from if you're not in front of the child. Remember, when you're not in front of the child, except you're using a video platform, you cannot see the child's feedback. And at a particular age of teaching of children, feedback is very, very important. Feedback and body language. Now, so you can't see this child, you can't get his feedback, you can't see his body language. You don't even know why you are teaching him, whether he's sleeping or he's talking or he's doing other things. Now, so all those things are what the educational professionals will be able to teach. Also, face-to-face teaching, the average school, basic education school, classroom time for a subject is between maybe 30, 35 minutes to 40, 55 minutes. When it comes to online learning or learning through a medium that is not face-to-face, you can't have it that long. It's got to be shorter. And there's going to be more intermittent breaks to be able to have times for people to check in and things like that. So it's a totally different way of learning when people are learning in front of a teacher as different from when they're learning when the teacher is not there.
You essentially are saying that as far as e-learning is concerned, we are still very much analog. But then if we are to step this up, because as Kayode said, not all students are going to school now. Definitely, the school calendar has again suffered from that famous word, disruption. Where do we go from here?
Again, the question is that, let's work with data. We closed down schools on March 19. So effectively, schools have been closed for 3.5 months. So in real terms, we have not really lost so much, because you remember, if there was no COVID, these children will have gone on holidays about last month, and they will likely go on a 3 months or 2+ months, what we call long vacation. That's what we call it, long vacation. So what it looks like is that the children took the long vacation before they got to third term. That's what it looks like. So in terms of the academic year and their possibility of being able to start the new session, we've not really lost 3 months in real terms. So the way I try to see it is that we took our vacation before we did the term. So what therefore should happen is, what are we putting in place for those children to go back to school? Okay, there were announcements that some categories of students should resume back. I don't understand where that came from. I'm so happy the NCD said it works with data. I am not aware that there's any data that shows that we are ready for any child to go back to school in Nigeria. And I say that with all sense of responsibility. In a country where access to basic educational support infrastructure is absent, there are schools in Nigeria where, for example, there is no public water supply, there's no toilets. How do you say they should provide hand sanitizers? A school that cannot provide water to drink, where is it going to have the capacity and resource to produce sanitizers? So NCA, the Federal Ministry of Education, for example, has said that schools should provide 5 things before they can reopen. And part of it was that they should be able to take body temperature at the entrance on a daily basis. How many schools in Nigeria has a fence? So there are many schools in Nigeria that you enter into the school premises from any direction. There's no gate. The school is an open field. You come from anywhere. How do you want to be taking daily temperature tests? That's one. Number 2, what is going to happen to that equipment? With the equipment for that public school? These are schools that perhaps have not even gotten chalks. Somebody wants them to have infrared. So I don't see any data that supports why we should open schools now. We've seen countries that have opened schools in Europe and Asia, and in particular location, they see a sudden spike. Because what must happen is that if a child has the virus in the school, the ease of spread will be much. So I don't see the basis for opening any school now. Now, yesterday, when the committee was saying that they wanted to open school, they said they were opening for graduating schools. And the question I wanted to ask them if I was there is that what is at stake for primary 6? By UBEC law, primary 6 is not a graduating class. Primary 6 is year 6 of the 9-year program called basic education. It would not be right for the Nigerian government to still be behaving as if you are still doing universal primary education. We started that in 1976 and stopped. And then we went to what is called universal basic education. Universal primary education that started in 1976 was 6 years. Universal basic education is 9 years. So primary 6 is not a graduation year. It's just the year you should go to the next class. In other climes, in other countries, primary 1 to primary 9, which is equivalent of our primary school and GS 1, 2, 3, are in one school. So primary 6 is not a graduation school. That's one. Then we said GS3. Now, let me ask a question. Who conducts the exam to go into GS3? NECO. NECO is a national body, is a Nigerian organization. So why are we in a hurry for NECO to write that exam? Why don't you ask NECO to tell them that when our children are ready or when it's safe, then they go back? Who is chasing us? We have our NECO. It's our organization. So why is that? Now, and that's different from when you're dealing with the SS3 guys, because they are writing WAEC, and WAEC is across the West Africa region. But Nigeria constitutes the bulk of the people that write WAEC. So we have the strength of numbers to be able to prevail. I know, for example, that Ghana started school in a bid to ensure that people are able to write WAEC. But my question is, we have enough leverage with WAEC.
Yeah, as you rightly said, I mean, you said you believe, as the PTF has said, that they're working with data and science. I mean, that's one of the things they have said time and again. And, you know, you have raised concerns for a lot of parents. In fact, there are some parents that say, well, really, you're not going back to school for now, okay, until the coast is clear for me. So yes, parents still ultimately have that decision to either allow their children go to school or not. But now that the government has announced that schools will be reopening, well, across the primary 6, you know, and other senior levels, clearly this seems to be the direction we're going. So if there are things we should put in place, I think now would be a good time to begin to suggest them so that that does not just happen on us. We just put those children there and then we regret it. So, I mean, you've mentioned inadequate, equipment for schools. You said some schools don't even have fences, for example. So that is a challenge. How do we solve those challenges? Because we can't just keep staring at those challenges and expect them to solve themselves. So how do we tackle this?
Yeah, the problem is that, like they say in social science, the problem is not the problem. If you did not have good schools, you will not have good schools with COVID. We had bad schools. COVID worsened matters for us. So if you say, what do we start to do with it? The first thing is that we need to start to have good schools. We do not have good schools. The average public school in Nigeria is an unsafe place. We have had kidnaps happen in schools. We have had deaths happen in school. We have had fences. So the first thing is that our schools must first be great. There's no negotiation about it. Now, so if we say we want, so the Center for Disease Control of the U.S. had 3 conditions that each educational sector should consider before schools open. 1, it must comply with existing law. Number 2, the school must be ready to protect. And number 3, there must be daily screening. So consistent with the existing laws, yes, we can deal with that. Number 2, the school readiness. And that's what the Federal Ministry of Education has provided information for. So what is the readiness they want? Hand washing. If our schools don't have water supply, there will not be hand washing. We know that. So we need to get our schools to have water supply so that there can be hand washing. Number 2, we need our schools to be able to maintain social and physical distancing. Now, there was a time that classroom student ratio in some parts of Lagos was 1 to 80. That data exists, 1 to 80. What that means is that in one classroom, there were 80 students. How do you want to maintain social distancing with 80 students in a classroom? The National Policy on Education says the standard should be 1 to 40 students. The student-teacher ratio and the classroom ratio. In many private schools, they don't achieve, but in those public schools where they have 40 students in a class, how are we going to achieve social distancing? So one of the things some countries have done is that they have broken the school into batches. So maybe this is a time for us to go back to what we had before, where there used to be what we call in Yoruba school aro, school or school ale, which is morning, afternoon, and evening school. So if there are 40 students in that school, you can conveniently break them into 15, and one set resumes 7 to 1, another set resumes whatever. But you can't do that if there is no electricity in that school. Remember, that means that classes will likely to get to the night. So if we don't have electricity in the school, we can only do 2 shifts. If you can only do 2 shifts and there are 40 students in a class, that makes 20 children in that classroom. You can never achieve social distancing with that. So that's part of some of the things we need to also change. Finally, we need to start to think about what we need to do to deal with the question of daily screening. In schools, daily screening is non-negotiable. There is no replay. If we will not be able to achieve daily screening, we should not open any school. Daily screening is so important that is not to be compromised. So are we going to provide infrared thermometers to all the schools? Are we going to be able to secure the schools to ensure that every child comes through one entrance and we can check them? Are we going to be able to provide resources to check the principal and all of that? And the teachers. The last point I want to make, and this is very important, is I think the CDC, NCDC did not consider that. The way we school in Nigeria is peculiar because in most parts of the world, there is a relationship between the distance of the child's home and school. In many countries of the world, people go to school with designated staff buses or they walk to school. In Nigeria, most schools or most public schools, people do not go to school walking, they go by taking public transportation. Nigeria is one of those few countries that has that peculiarity where you will see a 7-year, 8-year-old child on an Okada, that's a motorbike, or in a public bus going to school. And some of them take 1, 2, 3, 4 buses. So there are children who stay in Alagbole in Ogun State, but school in Ikeja High School. So they take a bike from Alagbole to Akute, they take a bus from Akute to Ikeja and take another bike from Ikeja to their school. That is exposure. Once our children will need to go to school with public transport and we will not be able to ensure social distancing, we have just exposed those we need to not only think about education, we must think about how those children go to school and how they come back. And that includes the staff. And that includes many things. And that includes all the support structure that exists in the school. So that announcement yesterday that the school has opened, should start to open, safe opening, they called it. As you can see, we have not done all of these things. So we're just making announcements and...
Well, it's only a matter of time before all of these things come home. But, you have raised some very provocative issues here. Let's hope that we have been provoked enough to do the needful, put our schools in safe enough states so that the children can do the needful and grow up safely. We have to thank you very much, Yomi Fawemi, Human Resources Development Professional. Thank you so much for your time and for your perspectives.